WNBA playoff viewership down now that Caitlyn is out. And is that somewhat factually accurate? Yes. It's not accurate. Viewership numbers with Caitlyn Clark are astronomical. She is a big draw. Yeah. She brings in all the things. We know this.
The conversation didn't explode because of one stat. It exploded because of what those numbers seem to represent. One comment about Caitlyn Clark's impact quickly turned into a much bigger debate about the future of the WNBA, the way the league is covered, and whether one superstar should dominate the national conversation. That's why what happened next drew so much attention, not just from fans, but from some of the biggest voices in sports media. As discussion about television ratings and fan interest intensified, Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharpe argued that Caitlyn Clark's presence had been a major driver of the league's recent surge in attention. Their point wasn't simply about one player scoring points or winning games. They were discussing audience behavior, viewership, and the reality that Clark had introduced millions of new people to women's basketball. Then Sue Bird entered the conversation. Sue Bird publicly challenged the way some commentators were framing the discussion, questioning why people working for ESPN were emphasizing declining viewership and focusing so heavily on the idea that the league depended on Caitlyn Clark. Rather than disputing that Clark attracts attention, Bird's criticism centered on the broader narrative surrounding the WNBA. That's where the story immediately became more complicated. Many viewers interpreted Bird's comments as an attempt to defend the league against what they viewed as overly negative coverage. Others felt she was pushing back against a storyline that reduced years of league growth to the success of one rookie. Fan interpretation. At the same time, some fans believed Bird's remarks unintentionally minimized Caitlyn Clark's influence, especially after months of record-breaking television audiences and unprecedented public attention surrounding Clark's rookie season. That interpretation fueled heated debates across sports media and social platforms, even though it reflected audience opinion rather than an established fact. Meanwhile, Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharpe continued to argue that acknowledging Clark's drawing power wasn't an attack on the WNBA, it was simply recognizing what they believed the available viewership data showed. Their comments added another layer to a conversation that was becoming less about numbers and more about perception. Within hours, the discussion had moved far beyond television ratings. It had become a debate about media responsibility, league identity, and how the WNBA should talk about one of the most influential new stars the sport has ever seen. And that raises the question that would shape everything that followed. Was this really about Caitlyn Clark, or was it about protecting the image of the WNBA? Once the ratings discussion gained momentum, the focus shifted almost immediately to something even more visible: ticket prices. Suddenly, screenshots of inexpensive playoff tickets began circulating across social media, and they quickly became part of the same conversation. What started as a debate over television audiences was now expanding into questions about attendance, demand, and whether the league could sustain the attention it had enjoyed throughout Caitlyn Clark's rookie season. To understand why this became such a heated topic, it's important to separate what was confirmed from what people believed. Sports commentators and media personalities openly discussed changes in television viewership and attendance after Clark's playoff exit. Those conversations became a recurring topic across multiple sports shows and online platforms. As playoff ticket listings showing relatively low prices were shared online, many fans interpreted those images as evidence that interest in certain games had cooled. Headlines emphasizing bargain ticket prices spread quickly, fueling the perception that demand had dropped significantly. Fan interpretation. For some viewers, those ticket listings reinforced a belief that Caitlyn Clark's presence had become a major driver of fan interest. They argued that her ability to attract casual audiences had created a level of excitement that was difficult to replicate once her season ended. Others disagreed, pointing out that attendance and ticket pricing can vary widely depending on the teams involved, arena size, market conditions, and the stage of the playoffs. Speculation. What no one could definitively conclude from ticket listings alone was why prices changed. Dynamic pricing, resale market activity, venue capacity, matchup appeal, and local demand can all influence ticket costs. While many observers connected lower prices directly to Clark's absence, that interpretation should not be presented as an established fact without supporting evidence. That's what made those screenshots so powerful. They weren't just about the cost of getting into a game. They became symbols in a much larger argument over the league's momentum, its biggest star, and the challenge of measuring long-term growth through a handful of highly visible moments. And as those images continued to spread, the conversation grew even more complicated. But ticket prices weren't the only reason this discussion kept growing. As the discussion continued, the spotlight gradually shifted away from television ratings and ticket listings and landed squarely on Sue Bird herself. That wasn't surprising. Few people have a deeper connection to the WNBA than Bird. Her career spanned nearly 2 decades, she helped define one of the league's most successful eras, and since retiring, she has remained one of its most respected voices. So when she weighed in, people listened, not just because of who she is, but because of what she represents. Looking at her comments in context helps explain why this debate became so layered. Sue Bird pushed back against the way some sports commentators framed the conversation around Caitlin Clark in the WNBA. She questioned why commentators were emphasizing declining viewership and attendance in a way that, from her perspective, reflected negatively on the league, rather than acknowledging the broader progress women's basketball has made. Seen through that lens, Bird's comments can be interpreted as an effort to defend the league she spent years helping build. For someone who witnessed the WNBA's challenges long before record television audiences and sold-out arenas became regular headlines, it's understandable why she would resist the idea that the league's success depends entirely on one player, even one as influential as Caitlin Clark. But that's where the conversation became divided. Some viewers believed Bird's response unintentionally downplayed Clark's extraordinary impact. They argued that recognizing Clark's ability to attract new fans doesn't diminish the accomplishments of veteran players or the league's long-term growth. From their perspective, acknowledging a superstar's influence and celebrating the WNBA's overall progress are not mutually exclusive ideas. That distinction is important because those interpretations are not the same as the confirmed substance of Bird's comments. Defending the league's reputation is not automatically equivalent to dismissing Clark's importance, even if some fans perceived it that way. Meanwhile, Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharpe continued to reinforce their position that discussing viewership trends was simply an acknowledgement of observable public interest, not an attack on the WNBA itself. Their remarks didn't create the controversy on their own, but they undeniably amplified it, ensuring the debate reached audiences far beyond dedicated women's basketball fans. At that point, the conversation was no longer just about ratings, attendance, or one interview. It had evolved into competing visions of how the WNBA should embrace its newest superstar while protecting the legacy built by the generations who came before her. That was the moment this stopped being just another sports debate. By this point, the conversation had grown far beyond a disagreement between a few television personalities. It had spread across sports shows, podcasts, social media, and fan communities, where nearly every new clip or headline seemed to reinforce one side of an increasingly passionate debate. The focus was no longer just on what Sue Bird said or what Stephen A. Smith argued. It had become a larger discussion about the WNBA's future and how the league should embrace its biggest moments. One group saw the situation through a straightforward lens. They argued that Caitlin Clark's popularity had introduced women's basketball to millions of people who had never followed the WNBA before. From record television audiences to increased media attention, they believed her arrival created a level of mainstream interest that simply couldn't be ignored. In their view, acknowledging Clark's impact wasn't disrespectful to the league, it was recognizing an opportunity to build on unprecedented momentum. The other perspective was equally passionate but focused on a different concern. Many believed that reducing the league's success to a single player overlooked decades of work by veteran athletes, coaches, and executives who helped establish the WNBA long before Clark entered the league. They argued that while superstar players can accelerate growth, the long-term health of any professional league depends on developing multiple stars, competitive teams, and sustained fan engagement rather than relying on one headline attraction. Those competing viewpoints were reflected by several prominent voices. Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharpe continued emphasizing Clark's undeniable drawing power, while Sue Bird challenged the way the broader conversation was being framed, expressing concern about narratives that appeared to define the league primarily through one player's popularity. Just as revealing as the words themselves was the way people responded to them. Viewers closely analyzed facial expressions, pauses, and vocal tone, with some interpreting Bird's measured responses as frustration and others seeing them as a calm defense of the league's progress. Likewise, Smith and Sharpe's emphatic delivery was viewed by supporters as refreshing honesty, while critics felt it placed too much emphasis on a single storyline. Those reactions reflected audience interpretations rather than objective conclusions. In the end, the biggest story wasn't simply who was right or wrong. It was how one conversation exposed two very different visions for the future of women's basketball, and how the disagreement itself became part of the story. As the debate continued, it became clear that this was no longer just about Sue Bird, Stephen A. Smith, or Shannon Sharpe. Those personalities helped bring the discussion into the spotlight, but the bigger issue was something every growing sports league eventually faces: how do you turn a surge of attention into lasting success? That's the question the WNBA now finds itself confronting. Caitlin Clark has brought extraordinary attention to women's basketball. Her transition from college to the professional game generated unprecedented media coverage, increased television audiences for many of her games, and introduced new viewers to the league. Those developments have made her one of the most closely watched athletes in professional sports. But attracting attention is only the first step. The greater challenge is keeping those new fans engaged long after the initial excitement fades. Casual viewers often arrive because of a superstar, but they stay because they discover compelling rivalries, exciting teams, memorable personalities, and meaningful games throughout the league. That's where sustained growth is built, not over a single season, but over many years. Many fans believe Caitlin Clark has fundamentally changed the conversation surrounding the WNBA. They point to the increased visibility, expanded media coverage, and heightened public interest as evidence that her arrival accelerated the league's momentum in ways that few athletes have accomplished. For those supporters, Clark represents an opportunity to reach audiences that women's basketball had struggled to capture consistently in previous years. At the same time, interpretation remains divided. Some commentators argue that when a league discovers a player capable of attracting widespread national attention, it should fully embrace that momentum by promoting its biggest stars as aggressively as possible. Others counter that long-term success requires a broader approach, one that celebrates Clark's influence while continuing to elevate established veterans, emerging talent, and competitive rivalries across the league. These are strategic viewpoints rather than settled conclusions. In many ways, this is a challenge that successful sports leagues have faced before. Star power can open the door, but sustainable growth depends on what happens after fans walk through it. That's why the real takeaway isn't whether one side won this debate. It's that the WNBA now has an opportunity few leagues ever receive, a larger audience that is paying closer attention than ever before. The question isn't whether that attention exists, it's how the league chooses to build on it in the years ahead. As this conversation comes full circle, the original question still remains unanswered, and perhaps that's exactly why it continues to generate so much attention. Was Sue Bird criticizing Caitlin Clark herself, or was she challenging the way the league was being portrayed in the national media? The answer depends largely on which part of the discussion people focused on, and that's why this debate has proven so difficult to settle. Looking only at the confirmed comments, Bird objected to a narrative that suggested the WNBA's success should be measured almost entirely by the presence or absence of one player. From her perspective, the league represents decades of growth, sacrifice, and progress made by countless athletes who helped build women's professional basketball into what it is today. At the same time, many fans viewed the conversation through a different lens. A large number of supporters argue that acknowledging Caitlin Clark's extraordinary popularity doesn't diminish anyone else's accomplishments. Instead, they saw it as recognizing the reality that certain athletes can introduce entirely new audiences to a sport. From that perspective, discussing Clark's influence isn't about creating dependency, it's about understanding how transformational stars can accelerate growth. That difference in perspective explains why the discussion refuses to fade. One side emphasizes protecting the league's long-term identity and collective achievements. The other believes embracing generational star power is essential if the WNBA hopes to continue expanding its audience. Neither viewpoint necessarily rejects the other outright, but they prioritize different paths toward the same goal, a stronger and more successful league. Perhaps the most revealing part of this entire story isn't the disagreement itself. It's the fact that women's basketball is now generating the kind of national conversation that once seemed unimaginable. Television personalities, former players, journalists, and casual sports fans are all debating the future of the WNBA with an intensity that reflects just how much the league's profile has grown. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway. Conversations like this rarely happen when nobody is paying attention. They happen when expectations rise, when new stars emerge, and when a sport reaches a point where every major storyline carries national significance. Whether people ultimately agree with Sue Bird, Stephen A. Smith, Shannon Sharpe, or find themselves somewhere in the middle, one thing is difficult to ignore: the conversation itself is evidence of how much attention women's basketball is receiving. The questions raised by this debate won't be answered in a single interview or one playoff run. They'll be answered over the coming seasons, As the league continues to grow, new stars emerge, and today's headlines become part of a much larger story. And that may be the biggest story of all.